This is also why you pay taxes. For the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Are you getting the idea here? It's not about business, as we saw in the video earlier. It's not about the taxes. It's not about the taxes. It's not about the grade in school. It's not about the justification of the feeling. It's about obeying the human authorities in which God has established on this earth, and thereby He uses them to accomplish His will in your life and in mine. Most of you probably remember Joseph in the Bible. Joseph was sold by his brothers. But before he was sold by his brothers, he was sold by his brothers. He was sold to a Pharaoh in Egypt. Potiphar, he worked for Potiphar. And he worked, and Potiphar trusted Joseph with everything that he had. Well, Potiphar had a wife. Potiphar had a wife that really liked Joseph. Thought he was a very handsome man. Went after him. Do you remember what Joseph said to Potiphar's wife? Joseph said, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against my God in heaven?" See, Joseph understood this principle. You can't separate the two worlds. You cannot be outside of the authorities that are sin and feel like you're under the authorities. You can't see the scripture. Can you understand then? Can you understand why sometimes you just don't feel very good in this relationship that you have with God? It just doesn't seem to be that closeness that should be there. You don't connect like it just seems like you ought to connect. Well, see, it's because lots of us are just dissing these authorities that are in our lives, that God has established, that God has ordained, good or bad, righteous, unrighteous, believing or unbelieving. Now, if we have a hard time lining ourselves up with the human authorities in which God has established, I can pretty much know what you're going to do when it comes to this book. Now, this is an awful big book. Don't let it scare you. The print's just getting bigger so that I can read it. Okay, but sooner or later we're going to have to come to this book, and this is what God's done to me this week. See, because you know those rules that we've separated and we've said are irrelevant, don't apply, that I just disregard? That's the same thing we'll do when we go to this book. Same thing we'll do when we go to that book. Children will say, kids will say, children obey your parents. I just disregard that. That one don't apply. Or as adults, we'll say, children obey your parents. I agree with that one. I agree with that one. How about husbands? Love your wives as Christ loved the church. I don't know if I agree with that one. How about do not steal? Yeah, I agree with that. I don't want people to steal from me, but sometimes it may not apply if I'm the one doing stealing. What about do not commit fornication or adultery? Nah. I'll just disregard that one, because God sure didn't write that for the day and age in which we live. Ain't no way. Because guess what? Everybody's doing it. That one don't apply. You see, what we'll do is we'll take and we'll break that rule down. This is no kidding. This is the honest to God truth. Just 2 days ago, I was at a particular event. And I was talking to, well, I wouldn't necessarily talk to them. I was just sitting there. And they were talking, a couple adults were talking amongst themselves. And they were talking about something that had happened with some of their kids. And they were talking about how they went down, the neighbors got upset what the kids did. And the parent went down and talked to the adult and said, well, it wasn't their kid, it was somebody else that was down the way. And they turned back and looked at me and said, I probably shouldn't be saying what I just said in front of the preacher. And I said, well, you know what? I said, you don't have to worry about the preacher. I said, there's somebody in much greater authority than me that you have to be concerned with. But what did she do? She took that rule. She took that piece of authority and she categorized it in an opportunity that was going to mean trouble for her. But she said, because it's going to mean trouble for me, I need to change the rule to benefit myself. You see, I know that things can be better if I'm in charge. Do you see the twist? Well, here's some of the objections that sometimes come with this whole idea. Because they just come. Well, what about if this authority is asking you to do something that God says is already wrong to do? Well, okay. That's not going to happen very often. But if it does, you obey God over man. But sometimes the best thing to do is to just go to the next line of authority if you have concern about what somebody is asking you to do. You just appeal to the next line of authority. Jesus did this. Daniel did this in Scripture. Paul did this. They all did this. You just appeal to the next line of authority. But how often do those cases come? Not very often. We'll just take the ones and we'll separate them and we'll decide just what's best for us. So here's my last question with all this. So what do we do with all this now? With the understanding now it's not about the what. It's about the who. And that God works through human authority. And to rebel against the authority in which God has established, right or wrong, good or bad, is to rebel against God your Father. And to have this notion that we can be in God's will, but yet be dissonant many of these human authorities that God has established is absolutely ludicrous. So what do we do about all this now? What do we do? Well, some of us need to write some letters. Some of us may need to write some letters to some authorities that God has put in our over us. Some of you may need to write some checks. Because you know it. God knows it. You've been cheating. And if you want to line yourself up with God's will, there's some changing that needs to take place in our lives. There's some changing that God, even this moment, has laid on your heart and said, you know how you've categorized this? It's not right.